My name is Madison Hamilton, and at 32, I never expected to be sitting in the most prestigious law firm in New York, watching my sister Rebecca completely lose her mind. The wealth of our family has always been a point of contention, but nothing prepared me for the moment she grabbed my $18 million trust fund letter from the mahogany table and tore it to shreds, her face contorted with rage. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. I just smiled and said, "Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with toxic family members." The Hamilton name has been synonymous with wealth and real estate development in Connecticut for 3 generations. Our sprawling estate in Greenwich, with its manicured gardens and private tennis courts, was the only home I knew growing up. My childhood was privileged in ways I didn't fully comprehend until much later. Private schools, equestrian lessons, summers in Europe, and winters in our chalet in Aspen. But within those marble walls, money couldn't buy the one thing I craved most, a healthy family dynamic. My grandfather, William Hamilton, was the true genius behind our family fortune. Starting with a single apartment building in the Bronx in the 1960s, he built Hamilton Real Estate Development into a billion-dollar empire through sheer determination and business acumen. Tall, distinguished, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through any deception, Grandfather commanded respect in every room he entered. He wasn't just wealthy. He was wise, ethical, and forward-thinking in an industry often plagued by corruption and short-sightedness. My father, Thomas Hamilton, joined the family business straight out of college. While competent, he lacked Grandfather's vision and charisma. He primarily handled the administrative side of operations, keeping things running smoothly while Grandfather made the big decisions. My mother, Elizabeth, came from old money herself and primarily focused on maintaining our family's social standing. She organized charity galas, sat on museum boards, and ensured the Hamilton name remained in the right social circles. Then there was Rebecca, my sister. 3 years my senior, Rebecca seemed to have been born with an acute awareness of her place in the Hamilton hierarchy. From an early age, she displayed a sense of entitlement that only grew more pronounced over time. When we were children, she would introduce herself to strangers as Rebecca Hamilton of the Greenwich Hamiltons, making sure everyone knew exactly who she was, or rather, who our family was. "One day, I'll run everything," she'd announce confidently at family dinners, even at age 10. My parents would exchange proud glances, mistaking her ambition for leadership potential rather than seeing it for what it was, an obsession with control and status. I took a different approach to our family wealth. Perhaps it was because I saw how it changed people around us, or maybe it was Grandfather's influence, but I developed a more reserved relationship with money. I worked summer jobs in high school despite not needing to. I chose to live in a modest apartment during college rather than the luxury condo my parents offered to buy for me. Education became my focus. I earned my undergraduate degree in economics from Princeton and later an MBA from Wharton. Grandfather noticed these differences between us sisters. While he maintained a polite relationship with Rebecca, he and I developed a special bond. We would spend hours in his study discussing business philosophy, examining case studies, and debating ethical approaches to development projects. He would tell me stories of his early days, the mistakes he made, and the principles that guided him. "Madison," he told me once, "wealth without purpose is just organized greed. Remember that buildings aren't just structures, they're homes, businesses, communities. What we build shapes how people live." This philosophy resonated with me deeply, but it made Rebecca seethe with jealousy. She interpreted every conversation I had with Grandfather as a threat to her perceived birthright. The more he mentored me, the more aggressive her behavior became. When I was 16 and Rebecca 19, she accidentally spilled red wine on my white dress minutes before a family portrait was scheduled. At 21, she told my college boyfriend fabricated stories about me cheating on him, which ended our relationship. During family vacations, she would make subtle comments to undermine me. Madison's always been the sensitive one in the family, or we all have to be a little patient with Madison's ideas. My parents, in their misguided attempt to keep peace, often enabled Rebecca's behavior. "That's just how sisters are," my mother would say dismissively. "You need to stop taking everything so personally." My father, uncomfortable with conflict, would retreat to his office when tensions rose. Their approach taught Rebecca that her behavior had no consequences and taught me that speaking up would only make things worse. After completing my MBA, I declined the executive position my father offered me at Hamilton Real Estate. Instead, I joined a competing firm as an entry-level analyst, determined to prove myself on my own merits. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up to Director of Acquisitions, earning industry recognition for several innovative urban renewal projects. My success outside the family business only intensified Rebecca's resentment. She had joined Hamilton Real Estate right after college, accepting a vice president position created specifically for her. Despite her title, most employees knew to double-check her work and run major decisions by grandfather or my father. Her extravagant business expenses and tendency to take credit for others' ideas became well known within the company, though carefully hidden from the public. Grandfather watched all this unfold with concerned eyes. During our private lunches, he would ask subtle questions about my career and achievements, keeping detailed mental notes. Though he never explicitly criticized Rebecca, his silence on the topic spoke volumes. "The true test of character," he told me once, "isn't how someone behaves when they get what they want. It's how they respond when they don't." At the time, I didn't realize he was preparing me for what was to come. 2 years ago, our family dynamic shifted dramatically when grandfather was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, 6 months to a year with treatment. The news hit me like a physical blow. Beyond being my mentor, grandfather represented stability and wisdom in our often chaotic family. The family gathered at the estate the weekend after his diagnosis. I'll never forget the surreal quality of that meeting in the formal living room. Everyone dressed impeccably as always, yet the carefully constructed facade of Hamilton family perfection was cracking under the weight of impending loss. "I've had a good run," grandfather announced with characteristic pragmatism. "Now we need to discuss practical matters." He outlined his treatment plan and expressed his wishes regarding business operations during his illness. Throughout his speech, Rebecca sat forward in her chair, nodding emphatically and interjecting with comments like, "I can handle that for you, grandfather," and "You can count on me to step up." That evening, I found grandfather alone on the terrace, gazing at the sunset over the property that had been in our family for decades. "Join me, Madison," he said, patting the space beside him on the stone bench. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke again. People show you who they really are when they think there's something to gain or lose. Over the following months, I arranged my schedule to spend every weekend at the estate with grandfather. We continued our discussions about business, but they took on greater depth and urgency. He shared stories I'd never heard before, mistakes he'd made, deals he regretted, moments of doubt. It felt like he was transferring not just knowledge, but wisdom accumulated over a lifetime. Rebecca noticed these extended visits and suddenly developed an intense interest in grandfather's care. She began arriving at the estate before me, positioning herself at his bedside and scheduling medical consultations without informing the rest of the family. When I'd enter his room, she'd give me a triumphant smile, as if winning some competition I hadn't realized we were engaged in. "Rebecca's been such a comfort," my mother commented once. "She's really stepping up as the eldest." The statement stung, invalidating the genuine connection I shared with grandfather and reducing our relationship to some kind of inheritance strategy. 6 months into his illness, I began noticing concerning patterns. Documents would mysteriously change location in grandfather's study. His longtime assistant mentioned that Rebecca had requested private time with his personal files for a family history project. Twice, I arrived to find attorneys leaving his room, with Rebecca escorting them out with hushed instructions. One evening, passing by his partially open door, I overheard a heated exchange. "You've always favored her," Rebecca's voice, tense and accusatory. "But I'm the one who stayed in the family business." I'm the one who's dedicated my life to Hamilton real estate. There are different kinds of dedication, Rebecca. Grandfather's voice, weaker but still firm. I deserve to be recognized for my loyalty. When the time comes, my wishes will be clear. That's all we need to discuss on the matter. I quietly retreated, troubled by what I'd heard but determined not to engage in whatever power struggle Rebecca was creating. My priority was grandfather's comfort and peace of mind in his final months. If Rebecca wanted to focus on the inheritance, that was her choice, but I wouldn't let it distract me from what truly mattered. As grandfather's condition deteriorated, his legal team became increasingly present. Arthur Bradford, his trusted attorney and friend of 40 years, visited weekly. A kind, shrewd man with silver hair and impeccable suits, Arthur always greeted me warmly, but maintained strict professional boundaries regarding grandfather's legal affairs. In his final week, grandfather's lucid moments became rare and precious. During one such moment, he beckoned me closer to his bed. "Madison," he whispered, his once strong hand now fragile in mine. "Trust the process. I've arranged everything. Just remember who you are, not what you have." 3 days later, William Hamilton passed away peacefully in his sleep. The family gathered one last time in his bedroom to say goodbye. Rebecca wept dramatically, collapsing into my father's arms. My grief was quieter but no less profound. I had lost not just a grandfather but a mentor, guide, and the one person in our family who truly understood me. The funeral was a public affair, attended by business associates, politicians, and New York society figures. Rebecca positioned herself prominently, accepting condolences with practiced grace. I stood slightly apart, watching as people who barely knew my grandfather eulogized him as a business titan rather than the complex, principled man he truly was. After the service, Arthur approached me quietly. "Your grandfather valued your judgment more than you know," he said, his voice low. "He spoke of you often in our private meetings." Before I could ask what he meant, Rebecca appeared, linking her arm through his. "Arthur, the governor is leaving and wants to speak with you," she said, leading him away with a backward glance at me that could only be described as territorial. The next 3 months passed in a blur of grief and uncertainty. The estate entered a quiet period of mourning while legal matters were settled behind the scenes. Rebecca became unusually scarce, canceling family dinners and citing work commitments. From colleagues at Hamilton Real Estate, I heard rumors of her holding closed-door meetings with the executive team and making veiled references to upcoming leadership changes. I focused on my own work, finding solace in the urban renewal project I was directing. The rhythms of business decisions and problem-solving provided structure during a time when everything else felt unmoored. Still, thoughts of grandfather's final words lingered in my mind, a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. Then the letter arrived, thick cream stationery with the Bradford and Associates letterhead, requesting my presence for the official reading of William Hamilton's last will and testament. The date was set for exactly 100 days after his passing. Whatever grandfather had arranged, the time had come to face it. The formal notification from Bradford and Associates arrived on a Tuesday morning. The heavy envelope sat on my kitchen counter as I sipped my coffee, staring at it with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Inside was an elegantly worded invitation to attend the reading of William Hamilton's will, scheduled for the following Monday at 10 a.m. at the law firm's Manhattan office. A note at the bottom, handwritten by Arthur himself, added, "Your grandfather specifically requested your attendance. This is important, Madison." That same day, my phone lit up with a text from Rebecca, the first direct communication we'd had in weeks. "Got the letter from Bradford. Dinner tomorrow night to discuss? Just the two of us." The new place on Madison Avenue. The sudden friendliness raised immediate red flags. Rebecca hadn't sought out one-on-one time with me in years, and certainly not to discuss something as significant as grandfather's will. Nevertheless, I agreed, curious about what angle she was playing. The restaurant she'd chosen was exactly her style, newly opened, exorbitantly priced, and frequented by people who wanted to be seen. Rebecca was already seated when I arrived, sipping champagne, and looking immaculate in a designer dress that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. "Madison, you look professional," she said, giving my simple blazer and trousers an appraising glance. Always the serious businesswoman. I ordered a sparkling water and got straight to the point. "You wanted to discuss the will reading?" Rebecca leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been thinking a lot about grandfather's legacy lately, about how we need to honor his vision for the company." "His vision was always clear," I replied. "Ethical development, community investment, long-term growth over short-term profits." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. Yes, all the philanthropic talking points. But between us, we know the business needs modernization. More aggressive expansion, luxury developments, international ventures. That doesn't sound like grandfather's philosophy at all. Rebecca's smile tightened. "Well, some of us have actually been working in the family business for the past decade, not playing at being independent. I think I have a better sense of what Hamilton real estate needs." The conversation continued in this vein, Rebecca alternating between subtle digs at my career choices and faux-nostalgic references to grandfather. By dessert, her true purpose emerged. "I'm thinking we should present a united front on Monday," she said, stirring her espresso. "Family solidarity and all that. Whatever grandfather decided, we can always make our own arrangements afterward, between ourselves." "What kind of arrangements?" Her eyes gleamed. "I'm just saying, there's no need for outsiders to dictate how our family operates. We can be reasonable adults about distribution of assets, company control, that sort of thing." I understood then. Rebecca was fishing for my cooperation, trying to secure an ally in case grandfather's will didn't favor her as she expected. I kept my response deliberately vague, thanking her for dinner and promising to consider what she'd said. The next morning, I called Jennifer, my closest friend since college, and one of the few people who understood the full complexity of my family situation. Now a corporate psychologist, Jennifer had an uncanny ability to see through manipulation tactics. "She's nervous," Jennifer concluded after I recounted the dinner conversation. "If she was confident about the will, she wouldn't be trying to secure your cooperation in advance." "Has she ever mentioned family solidarity before tearing you down at board meetings?" "Never," I admitted. "This is new territory. Just remember, Madison, your grandfather was no fool. He saw the same behavior you've seen all these years. Trust his judgment." Jennifer's words triggered a memory from the previous summer. Grandfather had been having a good day, his pain managed enough for us to sit in the garden. We'd been discussing a particularly difficult negotiation I was handling at work. "Sometimes," he'd said, gazing at the chess set between us, "you have to let your opponent believe they're winning to see their true strategy. The moves people make when they think victory is assured tell you everything about their character." At the time, I'd thought he was just offering business advice. Now I wondered if there had been a deeper meaning to his words. The weekend before the meeting, I discovered something troubling. A junior associate at Hamilton Real Estate, who had always been friendly with me, called with information he felt I should know. "Rebecca's been meeting with James Sullivan from the legal department," he said nervously. 3 times last week, closed-door meetings. Sullivan wasn't part of your grandfather's regular legal team. He handles mostly contract disputes. I thought you should know." Sullivan had a reputation for finding loopholes in seemingly airtight agreements. The fact that Rebecca was consulting him days before the will reading couldn't be coincidental. I spent Sunday reviewing everything I knew about family trusts and inheritance law, then made a call to Michael Dawson, a lawyer I'd worked with on several business deals. I explained the situation in broad terms and asked if he could accompany me to the reading as personal counsel. "Happy to," he said. "Though usually these readings are straightforward. Do you have specific concerns?" "Let's just say I've learned to be prepared when my sister is involved." Monday morning arrived with unseasonal rain, dark clouds hanging low over the Manhattan skyline. I dressed carefully, a navy blue suit, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, minimal makeup. Professional, dignified, but not showing any signs of the anxiety churning inside me. In the car ride to Bradford's office, I mentally rehearsed potential scenarios. What if grandfather had left everything to Rebecca? What if the company was to be sold? What if his final wishes were completely unexpected? I centered myself with a deep breath, remembering his final advice. Trust the process. Remember who you are, not what you have. The Bradford and Associates building was an understated landmark of old New York money. No flashy signage, just discreet brass lettering on the door of a perfectly maintained historic building. The security guard nodded in recognition as I entered the marble lobby, directing me to the private elevator that would take us to the firm's offices on the top 3 floors. Rebecca and my parents were already waiting in the reception area when I arrived with Michael. Rebecca's eyes narrowed at the sight of my lawyer, but she quickly composed her face into a smile. "Madison, darling. Bringing reinforcements." Her laugh was light, but her grip on her designer handbag tightened visibly. "Michael's here as a friend and advisor," I replied calmly. It seemed prudent. My father looked uncomfortable, tugging at his tie. My mother touched up her lipstick, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only when Arthur's assistant appeared to escort us to the conference room. "Mr. Bradford is ready for you now," she announced. "If you'll follow me." As we walked down the hallway, Rebecca fell into step beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just remember what we discussed. Family first, Madison. Whatever happens in there." I didn't respond, keeping my eyes forward as we approached the heavy wooden doors that would lead us to grandfather's final wishes and whatever storm might follow. The conference room at Bradford and Associates exuded old-world sophistication, walnut paneling, oil paintings of New York landmarks, and a massive table that gleamed under soft lighting. Arthur Bradford stood as we entered, his tall frame still impressive despite his 70-plus years. Beside him sat 2 younger attorneys and a court stenographer, ready to document the proceedings. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began once we were seated. "William was not only my client but my friend for over 40 years. He put great thought into the distribution of his estate." He gestured to the legal documents arranged before him, each bearing the Hamilton family crest. My father shifted nervously in his seat while my mother maintained her perfect posture, face impassive. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her eagerness poorly disguised beneath a veneer of solemnity. "Before we begin the formal reading," Arthur continued, "I want to convey something William emphasized repeatedly during our preparations. He viewed his estate not merely as assets to be distributed, but as a legacy to be stewarded. His decisions were made with great deliberation and with the long-term future of both his family and his business in mind." Arthur began with the smaller bequests, generous gifts to long-serving staff members, donations to educational institutions, and funding for community development projects in neighborhoods where Hamilton properties were located. The family butler received a cottage on the estate property and a retirement fund. Grandfather's personal driver was given one of his vintage cars and a substantial cash gift. Various charities received donations totaling nearly $15 million. Rebecca tapped her fingernails impatiently against her water glass. These preliminaries clearly held little interest for her. She was waiting for the main event. Finally, Arthur turned to the family inheritances. "To my son, Thomas Hamilton, and his wife, Elizabeth Hamilton, I leave the Greenwich estate property and contents, with the exception of items specifically bequeathed elsewhere, along with a cash settlement of $25 million and my collection of art and antiquities." My father nodded, unsurprised. This was essentially what they had expected: comfortable security, without corporate responsibility. Additionally, Arthur continued, Thomas and Elizabeth will receive a 5% non-voting interest in Hamilton real estate development, providing dividend income but no operational control. That stipulation caused my father's eyebrows to rise. 5% was generous, but the non-voting specification was telling. Grandfather had effectively ensured my parents would benefit from the company's success, without influencing its direction. Rebecca straightened in her chair as Arthur turned to the next page. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. "To my granddaughter, Rebecca Elizabeth Hamilton," Arthur read, his voice measured. I leave a trust fund in the amount of $7 million to be distributed in annual payments over 10 years. Rebecca's smile froze. $7 million was substantial by normal standards, but significantly less than she had clearly anticipated. And the structured distribution, rather than a lump sum, suggested grandfather had concerns about her financial management. Additionally, Arthur continued, Rebecca will receive a 15% voting interest in Hamilton real estate development and will maintain her current position as Vice President of Public Relations, with the stipulation that major decisions require board approval. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Not only was her inheritance less than expected, but her role in the company was essentially unchanged and now came with explicit limitations. This is... She began, but Arthur raised a hand. Please allow me to complete the reading before questions or comments. She fell silent, but I could see the storm building behind her eyes. Arthur adjusted his glasses and turned to the final pages. To my granddaughter, Madison Grace Hamilton, I leave a trust fund in the amount of $18 million to be managed at her discretion. Rebecca made a small choking sound. I kept my expression neutral, though the figure shocked me as well. Furthermore, Arthur continued, Madison will receive a 51% controlling interest in Hamilton real estate development, with the title of Chief Executive Officer and Chairperson of the Board, effective immediately upon the reading of this will. The room fell completely silent. My mother's teacup clattered against its saucer. My father stared at the table, avoiding everyone's eyes. Michael, my lawyer, wrote something on his notepad and slid it toward me. Breathe. I realized I'd been holding my breath and exhaled slowly. 51%. Controlling interest. CEO. The magnitude of grandfather's decision was staggering. The remaining 29% of company shares, Arthur added, will be distributed among key executives who have shown exceptional loyalty and business acumen during their tenure, as detailed in the accompanying documents. He placed a sealed envelope on the table before me. Madison, your grandfather left this letter for you, explaining his decisions and sharing his hopes for the company's future under your leadership. I reached for the envelope, but Rebecca was faster. She snatched it up, her hand trembling with barely contained rage. This is outrageous, she hissed, waving the envelope. I've dedicated my entire career to Hamilton real estate. I'm the eldest. I've been there for 10 years while she's been working for competitors. Rebecca, my father began weakly, but she cut him off. No. This is wrong. Grandfather wasn't thinking clearly at the end. He was manipulated. Her accusatory glare landed squarely on me. Arthur's voice remained calm, but took on a steely edge. William was of completely sound mind when these documents were prepared and updated. Multiple physicians and psychological evaluations confirmed this, anticipating potential challenges. Of course you'd say that, Rebecca snapped. You've always favored her too. This isn't about favoritism, Miss Hamilton, Arthur replied. These decisions reflect your grandfather's careful assessment of what would best serve the family legacy and business interests. Rebecca's face contorted as she looked from the letter in her hand to me. You think you deserve this? You, who couldn't even commit to the family business. Rebecca, I said quietly, this isn't a competition. Grandfather made his decisions based on what he thought was best for everyone involved, including the company and its employees. Easy to say when you've won everything. Her voice rose to a near shout. You always were his favorite. The perfect, humble Madison. So above it all, while manipulating him behind everyone's back. That's enough, Arthur interjected firmly. But Rebecca wasn't finished. Her eyes locked with mine as she slowly, deliberately raised grandfather's letter and began tearing it into pieces. If I don't get what I deserve, she said, her voice deadly quiet, neither do you. The room gasped collectively as fragments of the letter fluttered to the polished table surface. In that moment, Rebecca showed everyone exactly who she was, not grieving family, not concerned business leader, but someone willing to destroy anything she couldn't control. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my reaction. The moment seemed suspended in time as I looked at the torn pieces of my grandfather's final words to me. Then, with a calm I didn't entirely feel, I smiled. I knew grandfather kept copies. The silence that followed my response was deafening. Rebecca's triumph dissolved into confusion, then alarm as Arthur nodded solemnly. Indeed, William was nothing if not thorough, he confirmed, opening his briefcase to extract an identical envelope. This is one of several copies he instructed me to maintain. Additionally, he recorded a video version of the letter's contents, should the written document be compromised. Rebecca's face flushed crimson. You can't be serious. Completely serious, Ms. Hamilton, Arthur replied, his professional tone belied by the slight satisfaction in his eyes. Your grandfather anticipated various scenarios and prepared accordingly. My mother reached for her water glass with a shaking hand. My father stared at the torn pieces of paper, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. This is a setup, Rebecca declared, pushing back from the table so violently her chair nearly toppled. A conspiracy against me. I've given everything to this company. Rebecca, please, my father attempted, but she rounded on him. And you too. Sitting there like passive little puppets. Our family company is being stolen right in front of you, and you're doing nothing. My mother flinched at the accusation. Darling, your grandfather had his reasons. His reasons? Rebecca's laugh was harsh and brittle. His reasons were that he was a manipulated old man who couldn't see that his precious Madison was playing him for the inheritance. She turned to me, pointing a finger so close to my face I could see her hand trembling. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? All those private conversations, pretending to care about his philosophies, manufacturing that special bond. It was all strategy. I remained seated, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through me. That's not true, and I think you know it. My relationship with grandfather was genuine. This isn't about winning or losing, Rebecca. It's about honoring his wishes. Don't you dare lecture me about his wishes. She slammed her palm on the table, causing the water glasses to jump. I am a Hamilton. This company has my blood, my name, my birthright. Arthur exchanged glances with his colleagues, one of whom discreetly pressed a button under the table. Security, I presumed. Rebecca was escalating beyond professional boundaries. Ms. Hamilton, Arthur interjected, destroying documents doesn't change their legal standing. The will has been properly executed and witnessed. The trusts are already established. The share transfers are legally binding. Rebecca's attention snapped to him. I'll contest it. All of it. I'll have the best lawyers in New York prove he was incompetent. Arthur's expression remained impassive. As I mentioned, your grandfather underwent extensive competency evaluations specifically to prevent such challenges. Multiple independent physicians certified his mental clarity. Additionally, these arrangements weren't made in haste during his illness. The framework was established years ago, with periodic updates. This revelation seemed to stagger Rebecca. Years ago? He's been planning to cut me out for years. Not cut you out, I corrected gently. $7 million and a 15% stake is hardly being cut out, Rebecca. It's insulting, she hissed. A fraction of what you're getting. After everything I've sacrificed, I could see genuine pain beneath her anger, the pain of someone who had built their entire identity around an expectation that had just been shattered. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion. Perhaps, Arthur suggested, this would be an appropriate moment to view William's video message. It might provide context for his decisions. Rebecca laughed bitterly. Oh, I'm sure it will. More praise for perfect Madison, more disappointment in me. No thanks. My father finally found his voice. Rebecca, that's enough. Your behavior is inappropriate and disrespectful to your grandfather's memory. My behavior? She whirled on him. Where was this backbone when it mattered? When you could have stood up for me to him? You've always been weak, letting grandfather make all the decisions, and now letting Madison take everything. My mother rose, reaching for Rebecca's arm. Sweetheart, please. Let's take a moment to calm down and... Rebecca jerked away from her touch. Don't sweetheart me. You're just as bad with your social climbing and your committees. Neither of you ever had the courage to actually run the business, and now you're handing it to her? The conference room door opened, and two security personnel appeared discreetly in the doorway. Arthur nodded to acknowledge them but held up a hand to keep them from intervening immediately. I think, he said calmly, we should proceed with William's video message. It was his explicit wish that it be viewed by the entire family together. Without waiting for further objections, he nodded to one of his associates, who dimmed the lights and activated a screen that descended from the ceiling. A moment later, grandfather's face appeared, recorded perhaps 3 months before his death. Though clearly ill, his eyes remained sharp and determined. If you're watching this, he began, his familiar voice filling the room, then the reading of my will has taken place, and I am no longer with you. I want to explain my decisions directly, to minimize misunderstandings or hurt feelings. Rebecca made a scoffing sound but remained standing, arms crossed defensively. The distribution of my assets and the restructuring of Hamilton real estate development reflects my assessment of what will best serve both the family and the business I've spent my life building. This wasn't a decision made lightly or in haste. Grandfather shifted slightly in his chair, his expression softening. To Thomas and Elizabeth, I've provided for your comfort and security while acknowledging that neither of you has ever desired operational control of the company. The non-voting interest allows you to benefit from the company's success without the burden of its management. My parents exchanged glances, nodding slightly. This aligned with their expectations and preferences. To Rebecca, grandfather continued, and I felt the room's atmosphere tighten. Your trust fund and 15% voting interest represent substantial wealth and influence. The structured distribution isn't a punishment, but protection, both for you and the company. Your strengths in public relations have been an asset, but your approach to business fundamentals and personnel management has revealed areas for growth. Rebecca's face paled, then flushed with anger again. Being called out so directly, even posthumously, clearly stung. I've observed patterns of decision-making that concern me, grandfather continued, his tone gentle but firm. The Anderson property development, where corners were cut on safety to increase profit margins. The unauthorized bonuses to yourself while denying raises to support staff. The Wallace contract, where you misrepresented terms to secure a signature. Each example landed like a physical blow. I hadn't known about these specific incidents, but they aligned with the Rebecca I knew, prioritizing short-term gains and personal advantage over ethics or sustainability. To Madison, grandfather's gaze seemed to find me through the screen. The controlling interest and leadership role reflect what I've observed over decades. Your commitment to ethical business practices, your proven success outside our company, and your genuine understanding of what Hamilton real estate should represent moving forward. This isn't favoritism, it's my business judgment about who will best steward what I've built. Rebecca made a strangled sound of protest, but grandfather wasn't finished. I anticipate that this decision may cause conflict, perhaps even legal challenges. I've prepared for those possibilities. But my hope is that after the initial shock, this family can find a way forward together, each contributing their strengths to our shared legacy. His expression became more solemn. Rebecca, if you're feeling betrayed or overlooked, I ask you to reflect honestly on your actions and choices over the years. This outcome wasn't inevitable. It was shaped by patterns of behavior I've observed with increasing concern. The path forward, however, remains open to change and growth. The screen went dark, and the lights slowly brightened. Rebecca stood frozen, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she grabbed her handbag and stormed toward the door. This isn't over, she declared, pausing at the threshold. Not by a long shot. My parents exchanged alarmed glances and hurried after her, my father pausing only long enough to say, "We'll talk soon, Madison," before following his eldest daughter. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled slowly, feeling the full weight of what had just occurred. "Well," Michael, my lawyer, said quietly, That was quite a performance. Arthur adjusted his tie, looking weary but unsurprised. Your grandfather predicted something along these lines. He hoped for better, but prepared for exactly this. What happens now? I asked. Legally, everything proceeds as William outlined, Arthur explained. The trusts are established, the share transfers executed. You are, as of this moment, the CEO and controlling shareholder of Hamilton Real Estate Development. I glanced at the torn pieces of grandfather's letter still scattered across the table. And Rebecca's threats to contest. Arthur's expression was one of professional confidence. She can certainly try, but William was extremely thorough in preventing successful challenges. The competency evaluations, the video testimony, the documented pattern of business decisions, all were assembled specifically to withstand legal scrutiny. He handed me the intact copy of grandfather's letter. Take some time to read this privately. There are details about his hopes for the company that aren't covered in the formal documents. As I accepted the envelope, the magnitude of responsibility settling on my shoulders felt simultaneously overwhelming and right. Grandfather had trusted me with his life's work. Now I needed to prove that trust was well placed, starting with how I handled the storm that Rebecca was undoubtedly about to unleash. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was surprisingly quiet, the proverbial calm before the storm. I remained at Bradford & Associates for another hour, reviewing documents with Arthur and Michael, signing the necessary paperwork to officially assume my new position. Arthur provided me with a comprehensive folder containing all the information I would need to take control of Hamilton Real Estate Development, organizational charts, recent financial statements, pending projects, and strategic plans. William wanted the transition to be as smooth as possible, Arthur explained. He's been preparing these materials for months. In the car afterward, alone for the first time since the bombshell announcement, I finally allowed myself a moment of vulnerability. The tears came suddenly, not from joy or triumph, but from a complex mixture of grief, responsibility, and vindication. Grandfather had seen me clearly, had valued my principles and abilities enough to entrust me with everything he'd built. The weight of that trust was both humbling and terrifying. I hadn't expected the inheritance, hadn't angled for it as Rebecca believed. But now that it was mine, I was determined to honor it properly. My phone had been silenced during the meeting, and when I checked it, there were 12 missed calls, 5 from my father, 2 from my mother, and 3 from Jennifer. I called Jennifer first, needing a friendly voice before facing family fallout. Well, she answered immediately. How bad was it? Worse than I expected, better than I feared, I replied, giving her a condensed version of the meeting and Rebecca's reaction. She actually tore up the letter? That's straight out of a soap opera, Jennifer commented. But not surprising knowing Rebecca. What's your next move? Honestly, I'm not sure. I need to process everything, read grandfather's letter properly, then prepare for whatever Rebecca throws at me next. Jennifer's voice softened. Are you okay? Really? I will be, I answered, surprised to find I meant it. This is a lot, but it feels right somehow. Like this is what I've been preparing for without realizing it. Because it is, she said simply. Your grandfather saw that, even if no one else did. After promising to call her with updates, I finally returned my parents' calls. My father answered on the first ring. Madison, he sounded exhausted. Where are you? Heading home. How's Rebecca? He sighed heavily. She's processing. Your mother's with her now. The subtext was clear. They were managing Rebecca's emotions, as they always had. And how are you, Dad? This affects you too. There was a pause. Surprised, but not shocked, if that makes sense. Your grandfather and I had conversations. He indicated changes were coming. I didn't realize the extent. Are you disappointed? I asked directly. No, he answered, with unexpected firmness. Relieved, actually. The company needs someone with your perspective, Madison. I've always known that, even if I wasn't brave enough to say it openly. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had in years. We agreed to meet for lunch later in the week, after the initial dust had settled. The following morning, I went to Hamilton Real Estate headquarters for the first time as CEO. The executive assistant grandfather had hired 2 decades ago, Janet, was waiting for me in the lobby, her familiar no-nonsense expression softened by a genuine smile. "Ms. Hamilton," she greeted me. "Your grandfather would be pleased." She escorted me to what was now my office, grandfather's corner suite on the top floor, with its panoramic views of the city. The space had been subtly updated. His personal items were gone, replaced by a neutral professional aesthetic that awaited my personal touch. On the desk sat a small wooden box with a note. "William asked me to give you this today." Janet. Inside was grandfather's pocket watch, the one he'd carried to every important business meeting for 50 years, along with a handwritten note. "Time is the one asset you can never get back. Use yours wisely." I had barely settled in when Janet buzzed to inform me that the executive team was gathered in the conference room for my first meeting. As I walked in, the tension was palpable. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, and a few displayed open hostility. These were people who had worked under Rebecca's assumption that she would be taking control. Now they faced an unknown quantity. "Good morning," I began, choosing to stand rather than sit at the head of the table. "I recognize this transition is unexpected for many of you. I'm not here to disrupt what works or make changes for change's sake. I am here because my grandfather believed in a specific vision for this company: ethical development, community investment, and sustainable growth. That vision will continue to guide us moving forward." By the end of that first meeting, I'd started to identify who would be allies, who would need convincing, and who might be actively working against me. Janet provided additional context afterward, confirming my suspicions and adding details about the executive dynamics that had developed during grandfather's illness. "Rebecca has her loyalists," she warned, "particularly in marketing and public relations. Be careful what you share until you know who you can trust." Her warning proved prescient. 3 days after I assumed leadership, the first salvo in Rebecca's revenge campaign arrived. Formal notice of her intent to contest the will, citing undue influence and diminished capacity on grandfather's part. The filing was thin on evidence, but heavy on emotional claims about her dedication to the company and my supposed manipulation of a vulnerable old man. Arthur called as soon as he received the paperwork. "This is exactly what we anticipated," he assured me. "It's a nuisance filing, designed to create uncertainty and force a settlement. We'll respond appropriately." The legal challenge was just the beginning. Within weeks, Rebecca launched a multi-pronged attack aimed at undermining my leadership and forcing me to surrender control. First came the whisper campaign within New York's elite social circles. Rumors that I had manipulated grandfather while he was on heavy medication, that I had prevented Rebecca from seeing him in his final days, that I had threatened to leave the family business entirely unless he named me successor. My mother called in tears after a charity luncheon where several longtime friends had questioned her about these rumors. "Why is she doing this?" my mother asked, genuinely bewildered. "It's tearing the family apart. Because Rebecca believes the company is her birthright," I explained gently. "And she'll burn everything down before accepting that grandfather decided otherwise." Next came the internal sabotage. Key documents mysteriously disappeared before important meetings. Clients received conflicting information about project timelines. The press was anonymously tipped about supposed turmoil at Hamilton Real Estate following the leadership change. Rebecca's allies in the company began requesting one-on-one meetings with me, during which they would subtly advocate for returning certain decision-making powers to her. "She has relationships with these clients going back years," one VP argued. "They're more comfortable dealing with her directly." "I understand," I replied. "And she's welcome to maintain those relationships within the framework of her role. But final approvals will follow our established processes." The third attack came at the first board meeting under my leadership. Rebecca arrived with an attorney in tow, not the family's usual counsel, but James Sullivan, the contract specialist she'd been meeting with before the will reading. "I've analyzed the company bylaws," Sullivan announced without preamble, "and found several irregularities in the recent transfer of controlling interest." "What irregularities would those be?" Arthur asked mildly. He had anticipated this move and was present as corporate counsel. Sullivan launched into a convoluted argument about shareholder notification requirements and board approval protocols. Arthur let him finish before responding. Those requirements apply to public transactions between unrelated parties, he explained, as if to a first-year law student. Family transfers specified in a will followed different protocols, which were meticulously observed. I'd be happy to walk you through the relevant statutes after the meeting. Rebecca's face flushed with anger as her legal gambit collapsed. For the remainder of the meeting, she interjected constant objections to every proposal, creating a tension that made productive discussion nearly impossible. Perhaps the most difficult attack to navigate was Rebecca's campaign to turn our parents into her advocates. She began showing up at their home daily, sometimes in tears, other times angry, consistently pushing the narrative that I had manipulated grandfather and stolen her rightful position. My father, conflict-averse as always, began calling with tentative suggestions for compromise solutions. Maybe if you gave Rebecca more autonomy in her department, he proposed during one call, or a seat on the executive committee. Dad, I said firmly, Rebecca already has significant autonomy in public relations. What she wants is control without accountability, and I can't give her that, not after seeing how she's handled responsibility in the past. She's hurting Madison. We're all just trying to keep the peace. I understand that. But peace at any price isn't what grandfather wanted, and it's not what's best for the company. This pattern continued for weeks, Rebecca attacking from every angle, my parents vacillating between support and placation, and me trying to balance family dynamics with corporate responsibility. Throughout it all, I maintained my focus on running the company according to grandfather's principles, making it clear that I wouldn't be bullied into concessions that compromised those values. The turning point came 6 weeks after the will reading, when Janet placed a thick folder on my desk labeled Rebecca Hamilton, Financial Discrepancies, 2020 to 2023. Your grandfather compiled this, she explained quietly. He asked me to give it to you only if absolutely necessary. Given recent events, I believe that time has come. Inside was meticulous documentation of financial improprieties under Rebecca's management, inflated expense reports, misallocated project funds, client billing discrepancies, and most damning, evidence that she had directed company resources to renovate her personal vacation property in the Hamptons, disguising it as a corporate retreat facility that was never used for business purposes. The documentation was thorough enough to justify termination, possibly even criminal charges. But using it would permanently destroy any chance of family reconciliation. That evening, I invited my parents to dinner at my apartment, without Rebecca. I needed them to understand the full picture before I decided how to proceed. I didn't want to show you this, I said, placing the folder on the coffee table between us. But you need to see who you've been defending. My father read through the documents first, his expression growing increasingly troubled. My mother initially refused to look, but eventually relented. By the time they finished, both sat in stunned silence. This can't be right, my mother finally whispered, but without conviction. It's all verified, I replied gently. Multiple sources, documentation, witnesses. Grandfather knew everything. Why didn't he confront her? My father asked. I think he was hoping she'd change, given time and guidance. When that didn't happen, he made the decisions reflected in his will. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. What will you do with this information? That depends partly on Rebecca, I answered honestly. I don't want to use this unless I have to. But I can't allow her to continue undermining the company or attacking my leadership. For the first time, my parents seemed to truly see the situation clearly, not just a sibling rivalry or inheritance dispute, but a fundamental difference in character and ethics. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary, addressing years of enabling behavior and conflict avoidance that had contributed to Rebecca's sense of entitlement. 2 days later, I requested a private meeting with Rebecca. She arrived clearly expecting another round in our ongoing battle, but I simply placed a copy of grandfather's documentation on the table between us. What's this supposed to be? She asked dismissively. Evidence, I replied calmly. Grandfather knew everything, Rebecca. The expense reports, the Hampton house, all of it. As she flipped through the pages, I watched the color drain from her face, replaced by a look I'd never seen before, genuine fear. This is the moment where you decide what happens next, I continued. I don't want to use this. I don't want to destroy your reputation or your relationship with our parents. But the attacks on me, on the company, on grandfather's memory, they stop now. Rebecca closed the folder slowly, her usual combative demeanor temporarily subdued. What are you proposing? A clean slate. You keep your position and your inheritance. You drop the will contest. You stop the rumors and the sabotage. And we find a way to work together that honors what grandfather built. She studied me for a long moment, calculation visible behind her eyes. And if I refuse? Then I'll do what's necessary to protect the company and grandfather's legacy. But nobody wins in that scenario, Rebecca. Not really. After a long silence, she nodded once, not in friendship or reconciliation, but in recognition of a strategic reality. She'd been outmaneuvered, and she knew it. I'll drop the contest, she said finally. The rest will take time. It wasn't the emotional breakthrough I might have hoped for, but it was a start, a pragmatic truce that would allow healing to begin, both for the family and for the company grandfather had entrusted to my care. The first year of my leadership at Hamilton Real Estate Development was both the most challenging and most rewarding of my professional life. With Rebecca's legal challenge withdrawn and the internal sabotage ceased, I could finally focus on implementing the vision grandfather had outlined in his personal letter to me, a vision of ethical development, community investment, and long-term sustainability. My first major initiative was the Riverside Renewal Project, transforming an abandoned industrial zone into a mixed-use development that included affordable housing, green spaces, local businesses, and a community center. Unlike typical gentrification projects that displaced existing communities, we worked directly with neighborhood representatives to ensure the development served current residents while attracting new investment. The project broke ground 4 months after I took control, with city officials and community leaders attending the ceremony. Several business publications covered the event, highlighting our innovative approach. As I stood at the podium, I could almost feel grandfather's presence beside me, his approving nod at seeing his principles put into action. The success of Riverside became a template for our approach moving forward, profitable development that also created genuine social value. By the end of my first year, Hamilton Real Estate had launched similar projects in 3 additional neighborhoods, establishing a reputation as an industry leader in ethical urban renewal. Internally, I faced the delicate challenge of deciding Rebecca's future role in the company. After much consideration, I restructured the public relations department, placing it under the broader corporate communications division led by a seasoned executive I'd recruited from outside. Rebecca maintained her VP title and handled our high-profile client relationships, utilizing her social connections and charm, but with clear reporting structures and accountability measures in place. "You're demoting me," she accused during the meeting where I outlined these changes. "I'm placing you in a role where your actual strengths can benefit the company," I corrected her. "Your social network and relationship-building skills are valuable assets. The financial and operational decisions weren't your strong suit, as we both know." She didn't thank me for the diplomatic framing, but she accepted the revised position without further protest. Our interactions remained professional but distant, not the sisterly relationship I might have hoped for, but a functional working arrangement that served the company's interests. The situation with our parents proved more complex. Years of enabling Rebecca's behavior couldn't be undone overnight. My father adapted more readily, finding a new respect for my business acumen as Hamilton's projects flourished under my leadership. We established a weekly lunch tradition where I would update him on company developments, often incorporating his historical knowledge of properties and relationships. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told me during one such lunch, about 8 months after I'd taken over. "Not just of the business success, but of how you've handled everything." Including Rebecca. My mother took longer to adjust. Her identity had been so entwined with maintaining family harmony at any cost that my boundary setting appeared harsh to her initially. The breakthrough came when I invited her to help design the community spaces for our newest development. "You want my input?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "Your work on those museum boards and charity committees has given you insight into what makes public spaces welcoming and functional," I explained. "That knowledge is valuable." Given genuine responsibility rather than just family peacekeeping, my mother revealed a creative eye and practical wisdom that significantly improved the project. This collaboration opened a new dimension in our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than prescribed family roles. 6 months into my leadership, I established the William Hamilton Foundation, dedicated to supporting education and entrepreneurship in underserved communities. The foundation would receive 5% of Hamilton Real Estate's annual profits, creating a sustainable funding source for scholarships, small business incubators, and community development initiatives. At the foundation's launch event, I invited Rebecca to serve on the advisory board alongside other family members and community leaders. It was an olive branch, a chance for her to be involved in grandfather's legacy in a meaningful way that played to her networking strengths. To my surprise, she accepted. "Grandfather always said philanthropy should be strategic, not just symbolic," she commented at our first board meeting, echoing one of his frequent observations. It was the first time since the will reading that she'd referenced him without bitterness, a small but significant sign of progress. The most profound personal growth during this period came from my evolving understanding of wealth and responsibility. Grandfather's trust had made me extraordinarily wealthy by any standard, but the control of Hamilton Real Estate brought a different kind of wealth, the power to impact communities, create opportunities, and shape urban landscapes for generations. Jennifer noticed the change in me during a weekend hiking trip about 10 months after I'd assumed leadership. "You carry it differently now," she observed as we rested beside a mountain stream. "Carry what?" "The responsibility. Before, it seemed to weigh on you, this burden grandfather placed on your shoulders. Now it seems to ground you instead." Her observation resonated deeply. The inheritance hadn't just been about money or control, it had been grandfather's final lesson, that wealth without purpose was meaningless, but wealth directed by clear values could create lasting positive change. This understanding helped me navigate what became the most difficult family challenge yet, the first Christmas after grandfather's death. My mother insisted on maintaining tradition with a formal dinner at the Greenwich estate, despite the lingering tensions. I arrived prepared for awkwardness, possibly even conflict, but determined to maintain the boundaries I'd established. The evening began stiffly, with conversation limited to safe topics: weather, neighbors, my father's golf game. Rebecca arrived last, elegantly dressed but uncharacteristically subdued. During dinner, she barely spoke, pushing food around her plate and avoiding eye contact. As dessert was being served, my father raised his glass. "A toast," he announced, "to William, who is greatly missed, and to the family he loved." Something in the simple tribute seemed to break a dam within Rebecca. She set down her glass untouched, tears suddenly streaming down her face. "I was horrible to him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those last months, all I could think about was what I would get when he was gone. And now he is gone, and I can never tell him I'm sorry." The raw vulnerability was so unlike her that for a moment, no one knew how to respond. Then my mother moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "He knew, dear. Parents always know their children, even when we don't show our best selves." Rebecca looked directly at me for the first time that evening. "He chose right," she admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. "I wouldn't have protected his legacy the way you have. I would have changed everything." It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too much had happened for that, but it was an acknowledgement of truth that opened the possibility of a healthier relationship moving forward. Exactly 1 year after grandfather's passing, I visited his grave alone, bringing blue hydrangeas, his favorite. The granite headstone was simple, as he had requested, engraved with just his name, dates, and the words, "He built with purpose." Standing there in the quiet cemetery, I reflected on everything that had unfolded since that dramatic moment in Arthur's conference room when Rebecca had torn up my inheritance letter. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led to exactly where grandfather had hoped: a stronger company, a more purposeful use of the Hamilton wealth, and slowly healing family relationships. I understand now, I said aloud, placing my hand on the cool stone. It was never about the money. It was about values and vision, seeing clearly what matters and having the courage to protect it. The inheritance hadn't just been financial capital. It had been moral capital, the principles and perspective that gave wealth its true value. In choosing me to steward that legacy, grandfather had given me something far more precious than $18 million or controlling interest in a company. He had given me the chance to discover my own capacity for leadership, resilience, and wisdom. As I walked back to my car, I thought about Rebecca's journey over the past year, from entitlement and rage to the beginnings of self-awareness and acceptance. It remained a work in progress, as all meaningful change must be. But the foundation had been laid for something better than the destructive patterns of the past. The most valuable lesson I'd learned wasn't about business strategy or wealth management, but about the nature of true inheritance. What matters isn't what we receive, but what we do with it, how we transform assets into impact, privilege into purpose, and family wounds into wisdom. Standing at the threshold of a new year of leadership, I felt a deep gratitude for grandfather's final gift, not the wealth itself, but the trust that I would use it well. That trust had become my compass, guiding decisions large and small as I worked to build something worthy of his faith in me. True wealth, I had discovered, isn't measured in dollars but in difference made, in lives improved, communities strengthened, and values upheld. By that measure, I was determined to make the Hamilton legacy richer with each passing year, creating an inheritance of impact that would outlast any trust fund or corporate holding. What challenges have you faced with siblings or family members over inheritance or expectations? Have you ever had to stand your ground when someone tried to bully or manipulate you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is worth it, even when it's difficult. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my life. And remember, our true inheritance is not what we receive, but what we choose to do with it.